Hey guys, this is Miss Moore. I promised some of you that I'd make a video for you talking about membranes since I flew through this topic. So that's what I'm going to do. So body membranes basically are just for protection. They cushion your organs. They protect your organs by um, forming the cutaneous or the skin membrane that keeps bad things out. So that's what membranes are. Membranes are made out of either epithelial tissue, underlined by a connective layer, or just connective tissue itself. Okay? So those are the two categories, epithelial and connective. You need to know that. So epithelial membranes. So epithelium, as you know, is always underlined by a connective layer. And that's because, why? It's because epithelial tissue does not have its own vascularity, so it relies on connective tissue for its vascularity supply. Okay? So epithelial membranes are going to line and cover our body. And like I said, they all have an underlying sheet or an underlying connective tissue underneath the sheet of epithelial cells. That's why we call it epithelial membranes. So the first type of epithelial membrane is going to be your skin. So your skin's just a protective layer, all right? It keeps bacteria out. It keeps anything from the environment out. It's going to be a dry membrane, okay? So it'd be weird if we had mucus and fluid all over our skin. That would be weird. So we want it to be a dry membrane. You already know this, but a cutaneous membrane or your skin has stratified squamous epithelium. The reason it's stratified is because it needs to be protected, so it needs multiple layers of these squamous cells right here. Underneath the skin, underneath the stratified squamous anyway, we're going to have the dense connective tissue that makes up the dermis. All right. It's also going to be the loose areolar connective tissue as well. We learned about that. The dermis is made out of dense connective tissue and loose areolar LCT. So like I said, it's a dry membrane, no mucus secretion. So again, cutaneous membrane equals skin. It's made out of stratified squamous epithelium. And then underlying that is going to be dense connective tissue and also loose areolar connective tissue. So next are the mucous membranes. These are obviously going to be wet membranes. They're going to secrete mucus. We call this the mucosa sometimes. So the epithelium that mucous membranes contain is either going to be stratified squamous epithelium. So we have mucus in our mouth and our esophagus. So those places need to be protected because when we eat, if we were to have a simple squamous epithelium, we would die because a food we eat would rip it. Okay? So that's why we need stratified squamous epithelium. Or we can have simple columnar epithelium if we're talking about our digestive tract. All right, we need mucus in our digestive tract for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is so that our hydrochloric acid doesn't burn the mess out of our stomach. So that's why we need mucus, or one of the reasons. All right, depending on which one we have, well, not depending on which one we have, it doesn't matter which one we're talking about. Both of them are going to be underlined by the loose areolar connective tissue that's going to provide it vascularity. In mucous membranes, though, we call this a different name. It's still loose areolar LCT, but we call it in mucous membranes the lamina propria. Say it real quick. The lamina propria. It's going to underlie these right here in mucous membranes. Okay, so something else you need to know about mucous membranes is they're not directly exposed to the outside world and they're not closed to the outside world, but they line the cavities that eventually lead to the outside world. For example, your mouth, okay, is going to lead to the outside world eventually. Okay? So that's mucous membrane. So far, our epithelial membranes are cutaneous, the skin, and mucous membranes. All right, and lamina propria. You need to know that. Here's an example of, this is from the digestive tract, or I would guess probably the stomach, because gastric means stomach. So we have simple columnar epithelium here that's found in our stomach. And underneath it, we're going to have the lamina propria. All this is just loose areolar connective tissue underneath that simple columnar epithelium. So this is a mucous membrane. Our last type of epithelial membrane are called serous membranes or serosa. Not like cirrhosis, but it's called serosa. Anytime you see the word osa, that's talking about a membrane. So serous membranes are going to be closed to the outside world, meaning they do not lead to the outside world and they are not exposed to the outside world. If they were, then the simple squamous epithelium would be damaged immediately. So we have to have this protected. All right, it's very, very fragile. It's only one cell layer thick. Underneath the simple squamous epithelium, we're going to have loose areolar connective tissue underneath it. So this is just a tip. On the test, if you just feel like you don't get membranes and you can't remember it, when in doubt, guess squamous or areolar, okay? That's just a tip there. So like I said, it lines cavities closed to the outside world, and obviously it contains the serous fluid here that cushions it, so it's going to be a wet membrane. And we're going to talk about what this means. So we learned some new terms about serous membranes. So serous membranes are going to be closed to the outside world. Sorry, my dog's crying. I'm trying to see what he's doing. Oh, there he is. Hey, Logan. Okay. So we have a parietal layer. That's going to be what lines the cavity wall. All right. So the parietal layer is not going to touch the organ. So serous membranes include the membranes around the heart, around our abdominal organs, and around our lungs. These are very fragile organs that need to be protected and cushioned well with this serous fluid. So the visceral layer of the membrane is going to touch the organ. It's going to line it. It's going to come in contact with it. Between the parietal and visceral layer, we're going to have a cavity. It's like kind of like a water balloon. It's full of serous fluid, and it's just like a nice cushion. It's kind of like a water bed for the organ to float on. So it's going to separate the two layers and prevent them from rubbing against each other and causing a bunch of friction. So remember, simple squamous and loose areolar LCT. So there's three areas where these membranes are located. So we have the peritoneum. Anytime you see the word peritoneum, that means the abdominal region or abdominal organs. So we can have a visceral peritoneum, a parietal peritoneum. We can have a visceral pleura and a parietal pleura. And we do have a visceral pericardium and a parietal pericardium. So visceral means lining that organ or those organs, and parietal means lining the cavity wall. And I'm going to show you some pictures right now to further explain that. So here's the pericardium. So just think cardio when you see this one. So here's our heart. So this is the membrane right here that's going to cushion our heart like a waterbed. Your heart just doesn't float around there in there willy-nilly. It's covered by this membrane. We don't think about these sometimes. I think that's why it's a hard concept for kids to understand, or why people to understand in general. So here's the visceral pericardium. This is going to line the heart. Notice that it comes in contact with it and it's going to touch it directly. So here's our cavity. This is going to be where the word serous comes from. It's full of serous fluid that kind of cushions it like a waterbed. And here's the parietal pericardium that lines the cavity wall. Okay, so notice the parietal layer does not come in contact with the heart itself, but it lines the cavity wall kind of like wallpaper. Okay? Here's our lungs. So we learned earlier in the year that pleura or pleural means lungs. That's what that word means. Like if you have pleurisy, that's inflammation of the lungs, and it hurts really bad. Okay? So same principle, but just a different location. So visceral pleura, it's a layer of the membrane that lines the lungs directly. Here's our cavity full of serous fluid, and here's our parietal pleura that lines the wall of that cavity like wallpaper, okay? Peritoneum, this can be any of those abdominal organs, not just one in particular. So here is a transverse cut or transverse plane of the abdominal region. So here's our organ. So here's our liver, and here's our stomach. So the visceral peritoneum is going to line these organs directly. Ouch, my dog he's teething, so he just bit my thumb. All right, so our visceral peritoneum is going to line these organs It's going to come in direct contact with it. Our parietal peritoneum is going to line the cavity wall of it. And in between that, it's going to be our cavity full of serous fluid. Okay? And that's just going to cushion those organs there. Remember what I said in class, we have kidneys, right? And they're called retroperitoneal because that means behind the peritoneum. So our last type of membrane is going to be our connective tissue membrane. So we talked about our epithelial membrane. The examples were the serous membranes, the mucous membranes, and the cutaneous membrane. Those were epithelial membranes. So now we're moving on to the connective tissue membranes. There's only one type of this one. Okay, so this one's kind of easy to remember. It only has connective tissue. Okay, and they're between long bones, and they cushion and protect us. The only example of this one is your synovial membrane. Don't get this confused. Don't get it twisted with serous membranes. It's synovial membrane. It contains no epithelial tissue, and specifically, it has loose areolar connective tissue only. All right, and it's going to, again, line synovial joints, so between your long bones, like in your knee region, for example, or in your hip. It also covers tendon sheaths. This is just to prevent friction, so tendons aren't rubbing against your bone and snapping. That would be bad. And bursa are just fluid-filled sacs that protect your joints. This is a bursa. It's just filled with synovial fluid just to cushion these joint areas right here. Here's a tendon sheath. So anywhere where we have a sharp angle of tendons and bone, we're going to have a tendon sheath. And that just is full of synovial fluid and loose areolar connective tissue, and that just prevents these tendons from rubbing on the bone. Okay, so that's basically it. We can do this review real quick if you want it. What is the name of the layer of the serous membrane that lines the organ itself? What do you think? It's B, visceral. This is going to line the organ itself. Number 2, what are the 2 categories of body membranes we talked about? It's going to be connective and epithelial. What are the 3 types of epithelial membranes? That's right, you guessed it. It's mucous, serous, and cutaneous. Connective membranes are going to be just the synovial membranes, which are around the joints. What is the name of the layer composed of loose areolar connective tissue that lies underneath the epithelium in mucous membranes? What is that going to be? You guessed it. It's going to be the lamina propria. It's only in mucus. What is the name of the membrane that lines the wall of the cavity in the heart? So again, it lines the wall. It's like wallpaper. That's right. It's going to be parietal pericardium. Cutaneous membranes contain which type of epithelium? So cutaneous is your skin. So it's going to be what? C, it's going to be stratified squamous epithelium. Mucous membranes, are they open to the outside world? No, I think that's cutaneous membranes. Are they going to line cavities that eventually open to the outside world, or are they not exposed? So the ones that are not exposed are serous membranes, so that's going to be like your heart, lungs, and abdominal organs. So it's going to line cavities that eventually lead to the outside world. All right, so that's all I have. I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions, and I would be happy, more than happy, to help you with anything that you need. Have a great night.